Good morning. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative. Normally when I come up to talk, I introduce myself, but it's hard to beat an announcer and walk-on music, even if Whitney's walk-on music was better than mine. I do want to say a couple things on this slide, though. One thing is I try not to use acronyms, but I'm not going to be able to help myself, so I'm going to refer to Quantum Benchmarking Initiative as QBI a whole lot. Hopefully that doesn't hang too many people up. The other thing is, I heard Whitney say some really nice things about the program. It is a very large program. We have a lot of people working with us. It's so large, in fact, that Whitney was convinced to bring on 2 government program managers to manage the program. I'm the deputy program manager. Dr. Joe Altapeter is the program manager who started the program while I was a CETA working with him. So if you go digging around looking for additional information about QBI, either on the DARPA website or online, you'll probably see his name a lot when he's out giving quotes to the press or talking at other conferences. He'll be talking about QBI and giving you guys a pretty similar talk to the one I'm giving today. Yeah, so let's jump in. Okay, so what is QBI? Why are we doing this? This program is definitely, DARPA does a lot of weird things. We try to be independent as program managers. We have a lot of flexibility in doing what we think makes the most sense for DARPA and the Department of Defense. Even given that, I think that it's fair to say that QBI is a pretty weird program. The design of this program is really to try to figure out if the hype for quantum computers is real or not. Now, why does this matter? Lots of times, there's lots of industries that have hype. DARPA doesn't always jump in and spin up a big program to try to figure out if the hype is real or not. In this case, the reason is because the endpoints of either this is a science experiment and will be for the next 20 or 30 years, or this is the next revolutionary technology for not only security, but also for economic transformational impact in pharmaceuticals, batteries, nitrogen fixation, all of the things that you hear about in the media about what quantum computers are going to be good for. Those 2 endpoints are very large, and one of DARPA's mandates is to try to avoid strategic surprise for the US government. And so the primary goal here is to separate hype and try to narrow the uncertainty between the 2 extreme circumstances of either these things are really fun science experiments and they're great for generating papers, or this really will be a revolutionary technology for chemistry. Okay, so QBI is not the first thing we've done in this space. It actually expands on work that we did by 2 earlier programs. These programs are the Quantum Benchmarking Program, different from the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative. No applause is necessary. I know that we are really good at naming programs. It's fine. That program was designed to answer the question, if I grant you your miracles and you could build a really big fault-tolerant quantum computer, how big would it have to be before it actually could do something that people other than quantum physicists would care about it? What are the really industrially useful problems that a quantum computer might be able to do that is, smaller than the planet, right? Surprisingly, that turned out to be, when we started this program about 3 years ago, the answer to that question turned out to be based entirely on hype. There was a small amount of data on what you might use a quantum computer for, and we really wanted to dig into that and try to answer the question, should people be trying to build these things? It's gonna be hard. Is it gonna be worth it? And then the second question is the corollary to that, which is, okay, I think I can do something useful with it, maybe. The quantum benchmarking program will tell me, how hard really is it to build one of these? Is this something that's gonna be available in the next 10 years, or is this 20, 30, 40 years out still? And the second program was, okay, the utility, underexplored systems for utility scale quantum computing, US2QC. I won't bring that one up much, but that's also another one where it's a mouthful and I'll use the acronym a lot. Okay, so what did we learn from these 2 efforts? This is very high level, and there's a lot to look at here. If you've seen this kind of plot, this kind of just, as much as I hate as a scientist to boil things down to a single 2-dimensional plot, this is sort of one of the best ones that we could come up with for the quantum benchmarking program. And if you've seen this plot before, it might just make sense straight away, but I'll try and explain it really quickly. The y-axis of this is the computation size. It's how many operations do you need to run. So if you run, this is not depth, this is kind of width of your computation. If I have 100 qubits and they each do 100 operations, that's 100 squared computations. If I have 1 qubit and it does 10,000 operations, that's 100 squared operations. So it's the computation. So that shows up the same on the y-axis. The x-axis is the number of qubits that are involved in the computation. So this is different from physical qubits. It's more akin to logical qubits. This is really what are you using to do your computation. It's an abstract concept. It doesn't mean a transmon, if you're familiar with that. It doesn't mean a particular spin system or something like that. It's just what is doing the computation. So when we started QB, we tried to put points on this plot, and you can see kind of buried in there a red diamond. That's RSA 2048, factoring a large key for encryption. That's a hard problem. It's one that's been studied a lot. We took the most recent point at the time, which was a result from 2019. There have been a few results since then that aren't captured here. But other than that, there were a couple of points for studying a molecule called FOMOCO. And beyond that, there was a lot of discussion about what you might do, but nothing that you could actually put on a plot, even though this plot buries a lot of information. We couldn't even get these 2 data points for this. So at the end of a 3-year effort, we were able to go out and talk to professors and national labs, scientists at national labs, and people at places like Boeing who do not quantum physics, but do chemistry or do high energy physics simulations, and said, what capability would transform your ability to do your job computationally? And then how hard is it to do on a quantum computer? And we were able to get quite a few new points added to this plot. There's a lot of caveats here. It doesn't matter if you can solve a problem if nobody's willing to pay for it, and value is not captured on here. There are questions about, well, how many times do I have to solve one of these problems? Is solving the one problem 100 times enough, or do I need to solve a family of problems? How do I really understand what is the transformational capability here? Again, it's a 2D plot, and there's only so much we can do. But we were able to add a lot of points to it. And while I think that the odds are that any given point or family of points on here probably won't turn out to be a workload that somebody would run on a quantum computer at the end of the day, after the 3-year effort, we were willing to say that the preliminary evidence, based on how we were able to scratch the surface of this effort, is that quantum computers might be industrially useful. Not will be, but might be. And so maybe it's not totally irrational for venture capitalists to be investing in this as part of a high-risk, high-reward type portfolio, because somebody may find a way to really definitively prove that, yeah, you can make a huge impact in pharmaceuticals, for example. And that would be worth tens of millions of dollars a year, maybe more. Yeah. So the second question then comes to the hardware. So sorry, let me go back for a second. So these gray curves are like theoretical hardware. And I'm not going to go into the details, but those curves each represent theoretical machines that you probably couldn't build even if you tried. And they're very big machines. If I were to try to put systems that you currently exist today on this plot, they would be off the plot in the lower left. Their computational size would be below the 10 to the minus or 10 to the 7 threshold that you see here. So none of these problems can be solved by conventional computers or currently existing quantum computers. And the question is, can I build something that fits on this curve somewhere, like one of those gray curves? What would that take? So the second question is, well, if what I care about is strategic surprise, then I want to know if a quantum computer can be built faster than conventional wisdom thinks. And so we went digging. What do people think is the timeline to a large utility scale quantum computer? And we found a report from GAO, I think, and a number of others, but we found one in 2018 that was published in 2018. It polled a bunch of experts, and they said quantum computers will be available by about 2038. Found another report that was published in 2020. It said quantum computers would be built by 2040. That was the aggregate information. We kind of went back, and what we ultimately discovered was it seems like every time you ask this question, quantum computers are 20 years away from being built. Okay, that doesn't sound doesn't sound like we have much concern for strategic surprise. That having been said, even back when we were starting to think about this problem in 2019 and 2020, there were companies saying, no, we're gonna have really large, really powerful quantum computers by the end of the decade, 10 years at most. And we said, okay, what would it take to do that? And we're looking at starting a program around 2022. We said, or 2023, we said, okay, by the end of a 5-year program, a typical DARPA program, you would probably have to be to the point where you start just scaling. Like you have to have the science out of the way and you need to start building your machine. And so you would have to have built something that we call the fault-tolerant prototype within a 5-year time frame. That would get you, considering some coarse HPC scaling laws, up to something that might be kind of in a bubble of scientific utility around 100 logical qubits or 500 logical qubits by 10 years, right? And so, hey, we can start a program now. We can figure out, are people on a path? By the end of this program, if they've built to a point where they can scale, we'll know that they're on a path to really be transformationally, to generating transformationally powerful quantum computers much faster than the GAO reports would tell you. So we started the program with a very small group of teams, and we got started, we brought on 4 performers, and what we found was, after a year, we could only knock out 2 of the teams. We said, look, you guys are really smart, you're doing great things, your science is awesome. We don't see a path to the 10-year time frame yet. Please come back and talk to us later if you're able to make progress. But for 2 of the teams, after a year, we still couldn't disprove them. And then after another 18 months, we still couldn't convince ourselves that they definitely weren't gonna do this. And we started throwing red flags and saying, hey, this is scary. There are 2 teams. We only started with 4. That's half the field that we picked up. The field of quantum computing companies is huge. What are the odds that we got super lucky? About a year ago, we got permission to start the quantum benchmarking initiative. And the primary goal of this is to kind of pick up where those 2 programs left off and to determine, okay, let's take it bigger, let's open the aperture and see those 2 teams I mentioned who are still in. I still think the odds of them being able to build a quantum computer are less, are 10s, 20% kind of level by 2033. Or maybe even ever. But we're only looking at 2. If we had looked at the whole field and there were 30 teams in that category, one of them is probably gonna hit, right? You don't need numbers like 50 or 80% for 1 out of 30 to look pretty scary or pretty promising. So we started QBI and the program kicked off with performers in 2030, at the beginning of this year, 2025. And so what does QBI look like? Well, we are not interested in looking at incremental progress in developing quantum computers. It is interesting, that's great science. There's other people at DARPA who are thinking about those types of things. How can we make huge breakthroughs that nobody's thinking about? There's a lot of that going on. They're thinking about qubits. They're thinking about individual components. They're thinking at the very bottom of a computational stack. What we want to do is really look at the end goal and start to see, can we see a path from that end goal back to through a research program that starts today and ends within 10 years. And now, I keep saying 10 years instead of 20 years. And one thing that I want to point out is that we started this program in 2025. Our goal is really 2033, which is 8 years. And that's because when we started saying 10 years, it wasn't 2025, it was 2023, and we don't want to cheat. Right, so we're really looking at people who were on a 10-year time horizon back when we started talking about this, not when the program started. So we built this program to look at the end goal first, that's stage A. There's not a lot you can do in a 6-month period of performance, but we wanted to say, hey, let's get a bunch of people in, let's get them in the door, let's see what they got, kick the tires a little bit, and try to figure out, is it plausible? Not, will this definitely work, but is there a 5% chance that they could do this? Is this a real machine? Are they thinking about the end goals Do we have reason to believe that we can learn more information from these companies? If the answer to that question is yes, then we would go into a stage B. The stage B looks at, okay, I know what my end goal is now, or I have a pretty good sense, I'm gonna keep refining that. What is the path that you are on to go from current state of the art to that end goal? What are the major milestones? What metrics should we be tracking? One of our premises with this program is that a lot of the programs to date in quantum have tried, you sort of stuck in a position where you need to boil things down to a handful of metrics. And the proposals for building quantum computers come from a wide range of hardware paradigms. And what is a good metric for a superconducting team is probably not a good metric for a photonic team, right? That doesn't have like microfabricated superconducting devices. Very different approaches, very different metrics. Stage B is meant to define those metrics. For teams who have really thought about this, they have a plan, they have metrics we can track, and the government can really make progress in understanding, are they on track or have they diluted themselves? That's probably not the best way to say that, but there isn't, people are very bullish about their approach, and that's great, and we're excited for them, but we wanna know, are they gonna stay on those targets, right? If we think the answer is yes, then we can conceivably take them into a stage C. At this point, we have spent a year and a half trying to convince ourselves that folks aren't gonna be able to build a really transformational capability, and we haven't been able to do it. And so we're gonna really start to dig in and look at what they're doing, look at if they're making progress and staying on track, and we're gonna follow their individualized metrics. Okay, so where are we at now? Well, I mentioned before that we had 4 teams who started at US2QC. 2 of the teams have continuously been working with DARPA since the start of US2QC, and they have effectively been moved into QBI stage C. That started basically at the beginning of this year, and those 2 teams are PsiQuantum and Microsoft. Now, when I'm talking to an individual person, I like to ask, are you a skeptic or are you an optimist, right? And then I usually take the opposite tact because I think this is really complicated, and if you think these teams definitely can't build quantum computers, then I can start talking to you about why that might be wrong. If you think they definitely can, then I can start talking to you about why that might be wrong, because it's very complicated. There's a lot of reasons to think that these 2 teams still might fail, but we have not been able to prove that the very hard R&D that they still need to do can't be done. And so we are eagerly diving into a more deep engagement with them to try to really get our hands in the lab, get our hands on data, raw data, be able to do measurements ourselves and convince ourselves that they are or are not going to be able to stay on track. At the same time, we released a new solicitation for QBI to bring a bunch of new teams into stage A. Now, when we started that process, we told Whitney there'll probably be 6 teams, maybe 8 at the most. We were overwhelmed by extremely detailed and impressive presentations, proposals to the program. And we ended up adding 16 new teams to stage A. We are currently 4 months into stage A. We are getting to the point where we've had a lot of interaction with them. Our test and evaluation team has gotten kind of up to speed on what they're actually doing. They have just delivered the primary report that is the big deliverable for stage A, and we're gonna dig in and start to make decisions about who can go to stage B. When we started, and we thought we were only gonna have 8, I figured 2, 3, maybe 0. We might get lucky and be able to go home and sleep again and see our families. I'm a little worried that that's not the situation we're in, but we will see. Okay, so what do we do in stage A? I think that's a good question. 6 months is not a lot of time, but we want to try to make some progress, right? We want to keep our eye on the end goal, but we need to, every 3 months, every 6 months, we need to have better information about whether or not we think the team is going to be successful or not. So we kind of divided up our thinking into 3 different buckets. The first bucket on the left is the deep targeted analysis. That's mostly, well, you have somewhere between 20 and 300 people working for your company. You guys are working all the time, but it's possible that we have just the right person who can run a simulation and prove that your switching speed or your 2-qubit gate fidelity or your whatever is just not possible, that you guys are being too optimistic and there are physics reasons to think that's not gonna work. Now, do I think that's definitely gonna work? Probably not, it's pretty hard. All these companies they're very smart people and they're doing amazing work. There's no doubt about that, but we have to try. That's the deep targeting analysis. The other piece that I think we believe that we might be able to make some headway on is, a lot of these groups they've come from an academic environment. They don't have a lot of system engineering background. They haven't built really big, complicated machines, and that quantum computers definitely are that. So we created a sort of a very broad but shallow evaluation of the whole plan. And the goal here is to say, well, you've completely neglected to think about cooling. It turned, what you're doing now in the lab, fine, you can get chilled water into the lab. What you telling us you need to have implies you need to move more water than Mount Everest. Or, sorry, a waterfall. And so can we look across that and see where are the pieces that they've forgotten to think about because they're so focused on how do they improve their qubits, for example. And then the last thing is, okay, there's a lot of hype in this field, but we've thought a lot about what applications might apply to quantum computers. Maybe the teams have thought a lot about who they're gonna sell their quantum computers to. But the case is not clear that if you build 100, 200, 500, even 1,000 qubit system, that it actually will be worth the squeeze, that the value that you will get will be better than the cost to operate that machine. And so we asked them about their plans in that space. We compare it to what we already know, and we try to come up with a utility case for, is that system really utility scale, or actually the system you're building in 2040, best case scenario is the utility scale one. So just to give you a flavor, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the system evaluation methodology. I think, I don't wanna go into too much detail here, but we sort of break the whole concept of the computer down into 3 big buckets. I think there's a lot of ways to divide up any system, and this is certainly not the only way. It might not be the best way, but we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and it at least seems complete. So it gets us what we need. So we break it out into, we have a kind of a tree metaphor. We break it down into 3, at the highest level, 3 roots. Each of those roots is broken down into some number of branches. The total we have is 16 across the 3 roots. And then you break it down into some number of individual system parameters. Have you thought about, what is their plan for cooling? That sort of thing. And those are the leads. So this chart's a little old. We change this periodically, but the number has been fluctuating around 50 to 60 leads throughout. And so you can't dig too deeply into 50 things in a 6-month period of performance, especially when you kind of need your answer after 4 or 5 months anyway. So that gets truncated, and you can't really get started until week 2 after they've told you something, right? So this is very, like I said, it's very broad, and but it's recognizably very, very shallow. And it leads to something like this. This is a generic example. This is the high-level executive summary scorecard. These are all each box represents a leaf, and we have a coloring scheme to kind of tell us at this stage of development, and we understand that this is 8 years before they're supposed to build this machine, but at this stage of the development, had they thought about these problems enough? And they get a score based on that. It's not just this score, but it's hard to show you a narrative document that explains why each of these scores are what they are, but that comes with it. So there's more underlying this, but again, it does end up being, this part of it ends up being fairly shallow. Okay, so how do we accomplish this analysis? Well, we've partnered with a lot of different agencies. So we have folks who are potential transition partners. Those are the partner organizations all the way on the left. We've been in conversations with the Department of Energy, the state of Illinois, and the state of Maryland. For each of those groups, organizations, we have MOAs or MOUs so that we can coordinate our activities. They can see what we're doing to the extent that they need to. And if it looks like a team has reached a threshold that is important to one of these partner organizations, they can come in and kind of cheat off of our homework and start working with one of the performer companies. We also built what I'm fairly certain is the largest quantum computer test and evaluation team in the world. We have something like 300 human beings comprising 140 full-time equivalents worth of effort from 11 different organizations supporting us. So we had a huge kickoff meeting with everybody present at the start of the year, right before stage A began. We train the team up and we have kind of constant touch points with them. And they're really digging in and getting into the weeds and generating those color maps of the deep shallow evaluation or the broad shallow evaluation. And they're the ones doing the kind of technical deep dives and utility estimation. Okay, so I have a couple last slides. One is how can I get involved? So there's really two ways that I've talked about now. We have performers and we have test and evaluation team. We're always interested in bringing on more of both. In order to come in as a performer, as with any DARPA program, there has to be a solicitation, and there's not currently one available, but I would encourage you to keep an eye out on opportunities being announced. I personally am very hopeful that we will have another opportunity, because even with the 16 new teams that we brought on, there's at least a half dozen who called me the next day and said, hey, can we come talk to you guys? And there are many more than that out there. So we want to continually update our understanding of who is leading in the field. And so that's one way to join. And then the QBI test and evaluation team, we have a huge team right now. It needs to be a lot bigger. Stage A, we can accomplish with 6, 7 FTEs of effort. That's already a little tight. For stage B, we really want to get even deeper in the weeds. We want to keep doing what we're doing and expand on it. And in order to do that, we need to bring more people in. And then, of course, you can always join DARPA. Okay, so then just to conclude, why is this useful? I want to come back to one of the first slides I had. We think that it is vitally important that we determine if it really is true that huge industrially relevant transformational capability from quantum computers will be available within the next 5 to 10 years. Given the way the government works, if the government wants one of those, they need to start thinking about buying it now or pretty soon. And we want to be there and make sure that the US government is able to make the best decisions it can to reduce the strategic surprise for the national security impact and to really see the benefit of the economic impact that they promise. Okay, so that's my last slide. I know I'm not allowed to take questions, but usually there are. If you happen to have a question, I will be at the break after this, but yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.